Hello everyone, we're going to let this build up for a few minutes. This is the Survivors Challenge for the No More Heroin page. I say this petition was a success because the President declared a national state of emergency. I'm going to let this build up a little bit, and then I'm going to share my experience, strength, and hope, and journey through recovery, and how I work the 12 steps, guys. Okay, if you can hear me just fine and the audio and video is just fine, can you put some likes or hearts in there, guys? Hey Angel, love you sister. Thanks for all the help in Philadelphia. You're a warrior and a survivor just like myself. What's up, Savage? If you guys don't know, join Ride for Recovery's page. This is a coalition, not a competition. Savage is getting ready to take off on his journey around the country September 11th. Can everyone hear me just fine? Can you hear me, Higgy? Love you, bro. Okay, guys, my name is Michael Pack. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm supposed to tell you guys what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I am an alcoholic and addict. I believe it is a disease, and I believe it is genetic. And here's why I believe that it is genetic. Both of my grandfathers died of cirrhosis of the liver before they were 52. My great-grandfathers suffered from alcoholism, and they paid the ultimate sacrifice. My mom has 12 brothers and sisters. All of them qualify for the program except for one, and my dad has 4. I have 71 first cousins, and I'm the only one that is in recovery. So my little sister just found her way into the rooms. The reason I identify myself as an alcoholic and an addict is because the first time I ever picked up, and it was my choice, I used alcohol and drugs. So that's why I identify myself like that. I was born on the west end of Marion, the slums, Latourette Street. My parents were 18 years old. They didn't know what they were doing. And my mom had me, and I was born, I believe, addicted. I lived in an oxygen tent in and out of the hospital until I was 4 years old at the Marion General Hospital in Marion, Ohio, very sick because my lungs were born premature, and they couldn't take me out there or I'd die. It was kind of almost like a boy in a bubble, you know what I mean? They had a tent set up though, and to this day I don't like the cold. And I don't like it when it's wet or dark because of being in that oxygen tent. But being in the hospital kind of set me up for failure because I learned 2 things as an infant. And I believe that our addiction manifests itself way before we ever choose to pick up. One thing that I learned in the hospital is I learned that I was special because anytime I whined or cried or did anything or wanted anything, there was someone sitting right there to wait on me hand and foot. And, you know, I lived my life thinking that I was special. And the second thing that happened that set me up for failure is that my mom never left my side while I was at the hospital, and she taught me how to read and write. So before I started preschool, I could read and write. So I started off life ahead of the class. You know what I mean? So 1 and 2, I was special, and I was smarter and better than everybody, and those things set me up for failure. I can't tell you how old I was when I started using, like I said, because I believe I was born addicted. And my family is very dysfunctional, and my mom's brothers and sisters all use drugs and alcohol, and they used to give me hot toddies when I was a little kid and give me sips of beer, and you know, they would blow my uncles would blow pot smoke in my face, things like that. And so I don't know how old I was when I started using. When I got out of the hospital and I went to school, I could not go outside and play recess with other little kids because I was allergic to everything. So I became like a natural loner. And we all know how addiction isolates and then chokes us to death. And I was a loner and I couldn't play with other kids. I remember being a very little kid and me and my cousin walking down to the park to play. We were like 5 years old. I was a skinny, scared little kid, and these two older kids jumped us. And I was smart enough to run. And I ran home and I got away, and I went home and I told my uncle. And I learned right then and there that you don't run from a fight, and if you do, you damn sure don't tell your family, you know. We lived in a neighborhood. My dad was the only one that worked on the street. I mean, it was a white ghetto. Everybody sold drugs, stole, fought. You know, this was in 1980, and you know, I perceived my dad as being weak, for being honest, and I never had a relationship with him, or I never seen him because he took the only job he could get at Whirlpool, and he was stuck on second shift until I was 16 years old. And I learned not to tell my dad anything right then and there. My cousin was put in the hospital, and to this day I still get teased about that, you know. Nobody likes a coward or a chicken, you know. My dad and my uncle bought a set of boxing gloves, and from that point on, me and my cousin, we could not be kids and play with Tonka trucks or baseball or anything like that. Every time we seen each other, we were boxing. My cousin went on to try out for the Olympics out in Colorado Springs, but my alcoholism and addiction got in the way of that. I remember the first time I ever picked up, I was 9 years old. The first time it was my choice. And my dad, when he wasn't working, he was out in the garage drinking beers, working on hot rod cars. And I got my dad's refrigerator and I stole some beers. And my friend from around the corner, he stole some pot from his dad. And we went down to Glenwood Park and we got drunk and high. And I can remember just the greatest feeling on earth, because I had never fit in. I couldn't be a part of at school with other people. I thought I was like my parents and my aunts and uncles and everybody else in the neighborhood. And I got high and drunk until I puked and I passed out and got sick, and we got caught, and I got spanked for that. And I couldn't realize why I was in trouble for doing the things that my parents had just done every single weekend and everyone in the neighborhood, and I was just trying to be like them, and I swore that I would never, ever, ever pick up ever again. And you want to know what happened? 2 days later, I was right back down at Glenwood Park before the football game, behind Glenwood Hill, getting high and drunk all over again. My addiction robbed me of nearly everything that I ever wanted or dreamed of in life. I probably could have been a doctor or a lawyer. I made straight A's in school early on, easily, without putting any effort into anything. And I lived in the kind of neighborhood, you know, that when DARE came out, I think that we need to have education in the schools, but in my neighborhood it was ineffective, because we were set down and we were told if we went to school and said anything to the cops that nobody would like us and we would be known as tattletales, and we would never see anybody in the neighborhood ever again, and we needed to keep our mouth shut. So when the DARE program came out, I went to school and I kept my mouth shut, and it didn't help me whatsoever, you know. I really didn't have any role models. I dreamed of being a drug dealer because that's who people looked up to in our neighborhood. And, you know, I never really, when I got into middle school, I made my first successful drug run to Florida with some of my family members. You know, some families lay blocks, some families are carpenters, some families are lawyers. My family sold marijuana, and I made my first successful marijuana run to Central Florida at the age of 12 years old. And I stole some of that from my uncle, you know, and I robbed him, you know. I always considered myself never being a thief, but when I look back over my life, I stole drugs, you know. And I robbed some people, so I was a thief. But You know, I never really fell in love with a girl because I got into getting high and drunk way before I was old enough to get into girls. And I started getting locked in the juvenile detention center for truancy my 8th grade year. I missed 117 days of school, and I got caught selling weed at Ridgedale, and they locked me up. So before I ever even hit puberty, I was doing time, guys. And I was in and out of the system, and at 16 years old, I was in a bad car accident with my friend Michael Leonard. We were drunk and high coming home from the Oorang Bang, and I wasn't allowed to get my driver's license until I was 18. But at 16 years old, I got with a girl, moved out of my parents' house, and set up shop on my own. I went to a community high school called Tri-Rivers, and we used to call it Tri-Reefers because it was all the kids from 5 counties that couldn't conform in regular school. I was already in the occupational work adjustment program, the occupational work education program, and it wasn't because I wasn't intelligent or I couldn't excel in school, but it was because my addiction had grown and festered to the point even in middle school and high school that I could not function normally, you know. And I never went to my high school prom. I got a job at Myers Square right across from the high school, and I started selling joints and bags and anything acid, anything that I could get my hands on. And people ask me what my drug of choice is, and I've done every drug underneath the planet. My problem is addiction. It's not a specific drug. I've never tried anything that I didn't like. You know, when I got into recovery, there was nothing left to question. But at 18 years old, I finally managed to graduate, and I was the first one in my family to ever graduate high school, and it was a big deal. And you know how a lot of kids, most of my friends in my neighborhood already had kids, but most kids graduate high school, they plan on going in the service, they're signing up for college, they're getting a factory job, they plan on you know, getting married, you know, things like that nature. You know what I done? I took off to Florida, Texas, and Chicago and California to get drugs and bring it back to my hometown. I was successful at that till about age 21, and I was busted in Texas with a load of dope. My brother-in-law and my girlfriend were with me, and when we were in the jail cell, my brother-in-law let me know that my sister was pregnant. So I signed a statement on myself, took the rap for everything, sent Sammy home to get bail money from my mom and my friends, and I got the fuckets. You know, I got out of that jail in Nacogdoches, Texas on bond, fearing that my girlfriend was going to testify against me, and she was. And I packed a gun. I didn't have any real friends. I lived in constant fear of being busted by the police, and that was of good nature. If you go to the Multi-County Correctional Institution's website, just in my hometown, I have a 13-page record. You know, I did 90 days in jail for failure to register a dog, you know, that didn't have tags, and that's how much my community hated me, and they were talking about petitioning me out of Marion. But I gave Sammy my hookup, you know, and I was out on bond, and he died. And when he died, my little sister, she went to the counseling center to get nerve pills. And you know what happens when the disease of addiction is genetic in your family, right? It took over, and she became a full-blown heroin addict. I never really did get a bonding relationship with her children because I was down in Texas until Blake was 10 years old. When I got out of prison, they took me to the Walls unit in Huntsville, Texas, and bought me a gate ticket, and I went right across the street to the liquor store, and I missed my bus and ended up blacked out on Bill Street in Memphis for 3 days. And when I got home, a guy that I went to high school with that kind of knew who I was my parole officer, and I hated him and he hated me. And he told me, he said, "Mr. Pack, you're a notorious drug dealer, you're a menace to Marion County, and you're going to treatment." And he put me in a program in Mansfield, Ohio called Crossroads. And that's where my seed was planted. Even though I wasn't ready for recovery, I didn't want nothing to do with it. I stayed high and drunk the whole entire time I was in prison. I would not go to church because I thought people were Bible thumpers and Christians were weak. And I abandoned going to church at 11 years old, and I never went back, and I wasn't going to cop a due, so I had no plans on quitting. And I heard this saying. They said, "Hey, Michael, fake it till you make it." And to this day, I hate that saying because I can't do something that I don't believe in. And when I'm faking the funk or I'm doing something that I don't believe in, it automatically sets me up for failure. This lady named Lynn Spencer, she was the director of that facility. She made sure that I had a sponsor and that I went to meetings. And I got a job at Crane Plumbing stacking toilets. And I would go in at night, slip my ankle monitor off, give it to my homeboy, use fake urine while I was in that halfway house, and chase cars and sell dope, crack, weed, anything that I could. And the day I was supposed to graduate, I was caught at Gastown Speedway gas station in Marion, Ohio with $38,000. My aunt had set me up, and she had been busted, and I went back to prison, and I hated her. And I'm thankful for that today because when I went back this time and I was stripped of everything, my cellmate was an old black man, and he was in recovery. And I started reading the literature of the 12-Step Fellowship, and I didn't go to meetings or anything like that, but I would read those books, and I didn't get into hanging out. And I don't know if you guys can see here, but I've got cuts on my nose, everything like that. There's a sign that says, "Don't mess with Texas." And if you ain't been to prison, never go. You never have to go, guys. That's just part of my story, and that's what it took for me to get here. But when I got out of prison, I can tell you guys that being in prison, the loss of my family, the fear of death, I developed chronic pancreatitis because there's two types of people that are sent to prison. There are inmates, and then there are convicts. And you know how we are as addicts. I excelled in prison. My TDCJ job was my hustle. I was a barber, and everybody that was in prison was either in love with their wife, their girlfriend, a CO, in love with themselves, in love with another inmate, and they all wanted their hair cut. And down in Texas, you had to cut everybody's hair one length. So if you wanted me to risk my job, you had to pay me. You know, and the only thing that I would take were stamps, and I would take those stamps, and I charged people $1 a piece, and I would take those stamps and I'd mail them home, and my girlfriend would cash them into the post office and put the money on my book, so I would get dollar for dollar. You know, I ate out my box. I didn't lift weights, but what I did do was jog 20 miles on the lap on the track 3 times a week. I did 150 pull-ups a day. I did 500 push-ups and a couple hundred dips, and I was ripped and ready to roll. I grew up boxing in a white trash neighborhood, and I was not scared to hit the back wall with anybody, flat out. And I had this girlfriend, and that was the same one that I thought that was going to tell on me. She used to send me nude pictures, and I would sell them, you know. I didn't know anything about love, so if you're a girl out there and you're watching this and your old man's in jail or he's in prison and he's trying to get you to send him some provocative photos, I hope that you don't do it, because a lot of guys use that as a hustle in the joint. But when I got out of prison this time, I went right back to drinking and drugging. And I fell out. And when I fell out, the cops were called. I was on a dock at Kaiser Lake, and I had nothing to live for. I felt like I was doomed, like I was a failure. I never could get right. I couldn't get a job. My community hated me. I really didn't associate with my family. I couldn't make parole. I wanted to get clean, but I couldn't get clean, and when I did get clean, I couldn't stay clean. And believe me, I tried everything underneath the sun. And I can remember the cops kicking me and stomping me and not wanting to put me in an ambulance. They life-flighted me to a place called St. Rita's Medical Center in Lima, Ohio. They had a program called Mercy Hall there, and I spent 27 days in a coma. And on the 25th day, I came to. and I couldn't move my fingers, I couldn't open my eyes, I couldn't talk, but I heard my mom walk out of the hospital, and they gave me a choice. You know, I had some misdemeanor charges, I think some drug paraphernalias in Marion, DUI, just little simple stupid stuff that I never worried about. I was one of those people that jail didn't bother me, and I liked prison when I got here, you know. And but something happened. The desire to use left me after I was in that coma, and it's never returned to me, and it's never came back on me since then. But it took me 11 tries to get into the program, and I know that you can never count anybody out, because I'm the guy that nobody ever believed in, ever. They never believed that I would get clean, stay clean, or find a new way to live. And almost 7 years clean, people still question it. And I learned that it doesn't matter what people say, think, or do to you. It matters what you say, think, and do for you. And I got a choice. I blew every panel on a drug test, every single one of those. And my blood alcohol content was 0.42. I had chronic pancreatitis, hepatitis, Barrett's esophagus, and they told me, they gave me a choice. They said, they took me in front of the judge, and they said that I could either go to treatment, or I was going to Twin Valley Medical Center, which is the nut house in Columbus, Ohio. And I chose what I thought was the easier, softer way, which was treatment. And when I was in court, the judge told me, he's like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but in 10 years you'll be dead or you'll be in prison. And my dad's friend, his name was Rodney Hughes, they grew up together. He was the bailiff. They had me leg braked and they had me handcuffed. And he grabbed me by the throat and put me against the elevator. And he told me to leave Marion and to never ever come back. And that's when I hit my bottom right then and there, dead sober. You think being shot, stabbed, cut, going to prison, not having a family, not being able to stay in a relationship, not being able to function in society, you know, developing pancreatitis, would get me clean and sober, but none of those things did, man. I hit my bottom dead, clean and sober, and I knew that if I didn't change, that I was no longer going to live. And I decided that I was going to give this thing a shot. And I was hoping that it was for real, because I tried 10,000 things, man. And I was one of those alcoholics and drug addicts that would come up with a million excuses, like, if you dated this bitch, you'd get high and drunk too, or I worked for a week and I got a good paycheck, so I deserve to go out and get high and drunk, or oh, the sun came up, so it's a good time to get high and drunk, or the sun went down, so it's a good time to get high and drunk, or it's not my fault, I grew up on the West End, and my uncles and grandpa and everybody I knew sold dope, and I was set up for failure. And I had all this stuff in my head that always got in the way of me staying clean. But they tried to send me to a program that had sex offenders in there, and me being a convict and, you know, all of that shit, I refused to go. So this girl in my hometown, her name was Brandy Spalding. She's now the head psychiatrist at OSU Talbot Hall, the addictions program. She said, Michael, I found a halfway house for you. And I said, what is it? And she said, it's called the Serenity House in Sydney, Ohio. And I said, I'll go, because I didn't want to go to the nut ward. You know, I only change when the consequence is greater than the reward. And, you know, even though I was insane within my addiction, I did not think I was crazy, and I did not want to go to the nut ward. I was told as a kid, never act crazy and never commit a violent crime, and you'll never hit a maximum unit, and don't do those things if you're not. And I never did, and I still hit a maximum unit in the state of Texas, because I was an out-of-state resident when I committed my felony. And when they let me out of the Walls unit for the second time, they let me know that I need to leave the state of Texas and never come back. And I didn't want to go to no nut ward, so I packed my bags, and they took me to the Serenity House that was founded by Ivan Fask, Sydney, Ohio, and it sat on the grounds of the Methodist Church. It was a halfway house. And I got stuck with what I thought were Christians. And I perceived people of faith to be weak and boring, and I didn't want anything to do with that. And what happened was, for the first time in my life, I met some people who did not want anything from me whatsoever other than to help me. And I started off in that program with Goodwill clothes on my back. You know, my mom had changed her phone number. I didn't have any friends. A lot of them were dead or in prison, or I wasn't allowed to go around them because I was a felon. I had $50,000 in fines to pay, and I had to ride a bicycle for 3 years or walk, and I had 1,000 hours of community service to do. And they made us go through the NIV Life Recovery Bible. You had to pay $100 a week, and you had to get a job. And I couldn't get a job because of all of my arrests here in Ohio and my felony convictions, and no one would hire me. You know, I didn't start out on fire for recovery. I can remember my first Christmas. I'd had $500 in my account, and I wanted the pastor to give it to me, and he made me go to the Alpha Center, which is the soup kitchen. And you know, I was like a kid. I was going to spend all of that money on myself. And if he would have gave me that money, I probably would not be here today. You know, at that soup kitchen on Christmas Day, I became grateful because I realized that I could be standing in that line, hungry all by myself, needing something to eat, and I wasn't. And that's when the light came on for me. So anybody can do this thing, guys, if I can do it. I was introduced to the 12-step fellowship, and I went to meetings, and I hung around on the edges, and it took me about 6 months to get a sponsor. And when I got a sponsor, I told him, I was like, I'm 6 months sober, I'm in recovery. And he's like, you don't have any recovery. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he said, there's 3 parts to the program, Michael. He said there's fellowshipping, which is going to meetings, hanging out with like-minded alcoholics and drug addicts. And he said the second part of the program is recovery. He said that's trust God, clean house, and help others, and that's the 12 steps. And until you work the 12 steps, you're not in recovery. He said, and the third part is service work. And I was like, service work? He's like, yeah, you have to help other people. And, you know, I'd never done anything for anybody ever in my life before I got in recovery unless it benefited me. And that's one of the types of people I were. He told me that he wanted me to go to a meeting every day for 90 days. He set me down. He said, I'm not your marriage counselor. I'm not your banker. I'm not your taxi. He said, I'm not your shoulder to cry on. I'm your sponsor, and I'm going to walk you through the steps and teach you about recovery. And if you do anything that I tell you not to do, I will fire you. He said, if you could stay clean and sober on your own, you'd already done it years before you got here, so what you think and what you know doesn't matter. You know how to get high and drunk and mess your life up, and you don't know anything about recovery. He said, I want you to pick a home group. He said, you were homeless when you got here, and you don't need to be homeless in recovery. So I got a home group, and he said, you're no longer allowed to sit on the edge of the room. He said, you'll fall out of the middle of the boat. He said, I want you to sit right up in the center of the table. He said, you're not allowed to get in a relationship. He said, if a woman is attracted to you, she's sicker than you are. And he said, this is no place to play around. That's exactly what he told me. He said, and you're to treat people in recovery like they're your brothers and your sisters. He said it'd be awful selfish of you to lie to somebody, get in their pants, have sex with them, not feel anything, see them at a meeting and you're trying something with somebody else, and that person go out and get high and lose their life and die. So I want you to stay out of relationships. And he told me, he's like, I want you to go home tonight and I want you to pray. He said, if you made it through the day clean and sober, I don't care what happened, you won and it was a success, and I want you to thank your higher power. And I was like, oh great, Jesus freak. That fucking shit don't work for me, bro. I've been in prison and jail most of my entire life, and I don't want anything to do with religion. And he pointed out to me, he said that, he said, look how many times it says the word alcohol or addiction in the 12 steps, and look how many times it says God or a higher power. He said, this is a spiritual program, Michael, and if you're not willing to be spiritual, then it's never going to work for you. He said there's a difference in religion and spirituality. He said religion is governed by a higher power. Most people call it Jesus or God. He said, and if you're good here on earth, if you do all the things that they think that you should do, when you die, you go to heaven. He said, if you're bad here on earth, when you die, you go to hell. He said spirituality, on the other hand, is similar to religion, but it's not the same. He said the word spirit means of the breath. He said it's an Arabic word, and it's 8,000 years old, and as long as you're breathing, you're spiritual. And now, if you're spiritually fit or not, that's the question, you know. And he said spirituality could be governed by God, Jesus, Buddha, Hinduism, Wiccan, pagan, Muslim, or you could even not have a higher power and it could work for you. And he told me if I was good here on earth, more than likely I wouldn't have to get high and drunk. I would get my family back. I would be able to hold a job. I could probably keep a girlfriend, and I would never go to jail again. He said if I was bad here on earth, more than likely I would never get my family back. I would be in and out of jail, and I would live high and drunk and miserable until the day I died. And I could definitely understand that, you know, because I had been high and miserable and drunk for 34 years. It was easier for me to be in jail all by myself, to where I didn't have to take care of myself, and you take everything out of the equation, than it was to function in society. And everything that I ever tried in my life to get clean and sober did not work, and I was desperate. So I started working the steps, and the first step is we were powerless over alcohol or our addiction, and our life was unmanageable. I knew I was powerless over my addiction. The first time I ever picked up, I got high and drunk until I puked at 9 years old, and I got spanked for it. I swore I was never going to do it again, and I picked up 2 days later. And the last time that I got high and drunk, I fell out on a dock, and I was life flighted, and I spent 27 days in a coma. And I've never known what happens when I've ever picked up. And if you're an addict or an alcoholic of my nature, just rewind the tape and look back. But I learned something in working that first step. I learned that I'm powerless once I pick up and I'm using drugs. And I never know what's going to happen or where I'm going to end up. And I don't care about myself or anybody else, and I become a slave. But guess what? If I'm not using, I'm not powerless. Period. Once that phenomena of craving leaves you, and it's out of your system, and you've made it through withdrawal or detox like that, it's your choice if you ever pick up back up again, is what my sponsor taught me. And since he taught me that, I've never had to pick back up again. But there's two parts to that step. The second part to that step is my life is unmanageable. It was real easy for me to see that my life was unmanageable when I got here, because I couldn't hold a job, I couldn't live in society, I couldn't stay clean and sober, I couldn't stay in a relationship with a girlfriend, I did not have my family, and I was ordered into a halfway house or go to the nut ward. So it was real easy for me to see that my life was unmanageable. But guess what? My life is still unmanageable today, because after everything that I've ever been through, there's only one thing that I haven't been able to change about myself. That's the fact that I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I can't pretend no more, and it's never going away, ever. And I always have to concentrate on that. And if I'm going to stay clean and sober, I have to have a program, and I have to follow it to the best of my ability, and I cannot be in control of that program, because left to my own devices, I mess it up every time. The second step is a power greater than myself restored me to sanity. You know, what is the definition of insanity? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again, expecting a different result. You know, I just told you guys, left to my own devices, that I will get high and drunk every time. You know, there's plenty of times that I stopped and swore I was never going to use again, and then the light bulb went off, and all of a sudden again that I would pick back up and I'd be using, and then something would intervene in my life. And I don't know why I'm dead. I'm not dead, I mean, and I don't know why I'm alive here today. To date, I've lost 118 friends, and they paved the way for me, and I believe that I got here through a divine intervention. looking back on my life, I was not that smart. I was not that lucky. You know, something was looking out for me, and there's no reason why I could explain why I'm sitting here today. But this right here is the most dangerous playground in the world for me, you know, and I have to stay out of here as much as possible. And when I got here, I believed in God and I believed in Jesus. I just never had a relationship with Him. So you know who I used for my higher power at first? My parole officer. And people are like, what the fuck are you talking about, Michael? You used your parole officer for your higher power. Well, if you're on probation or parole, and you don't think that your parole officer or your probation officer is a power greater than yourself, get high, don't report, or mess up and see if they don't lock you up. They are a power greater than yourself. And I started using the rooms, you know, and I was one of those people that I came to, and then I came to believe. And the third step is we turned our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him. The hardest part about me working this step is getting rid of all those conceptions that I ever learned about God or Jesus or religion. You know, half of my family was Pentecostal. They would run around the church and they would scream and talk in tongues and they would pass out. And I can remember in the early 80s, like 1985, they played movies at my mom's church about the end of the world. And it scared me. And I didn't want anything to do with it. And then the other religion I was around was Catholic. And they were very stern, very stubborn, and they were strict, and it was boring. And that's where I based my opinion that people of faith were weak and boring and stupid, and that I was never going to be a Christian because of those life experiences that I had. And I felt like I was dealt a wrong hand in life. You know, I was born addicted. I never had a chance. I grew up in a white trash neighborhood. My family sold drugs. You know, and I only knew 2 prayers when I got here, and one was, oh God, why me? And the other one was, if you get me out of this one, I promise I'll never ever do it again. But turning my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him, to this day I do not debate what somebody else's higher power or religion is. I say that it can all work as long as you believe in something. You know, there's an old saying, if you don't believe in something, you automatically fall for anything. And that's what happened to me most of my entire life. And I fell for anything, and it was for any substance that I could ever put in my body. You know, and that's what brought me to my knees in my lowest point. But looking over my life, I knew that something was looking out for me. And I believe that I'm a miracle, and I believe that the ground that I walk on today is blessed. Because I've made it through everything. Everything that you've ever went through in your entire life, you're batting 1,000 right now. If you're clean and sober and you're still alive, you're a winner. And you cannot judge desire, because desire lives in the heart and soul of the person that wants to be clean and sober. And it doesn't matter what your family background is, what shoes you're wearing on your feet, how much money you got in the bank, how many times you have relapsed. If you have a court slip, you don't have a court slip. If nobody believes in you, desire is like beauty, like it's in the eye of the beholder, and it's in the heart of the person, and you can never judge someone's desire. And that's why the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop using. But I'm not like a normal person, you know. I hit my knees. I did my 3rd step, and I didn't feel anything. But I know I'm not like a regular Christian, you know. My desire changes constantly. I'm not one of those people that can turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him and live the rest of my life being honest. It's something that I have to do all the time because my desire changes. And the more I work on staying clean, the less I think about getting high. And the less I work on staying clean, the more I think about getting high. So I can do my 3rd step prayer in the morning, jump in my car, be heading to work, and you can go to cut me off, and I can be ready to kill you, you know, 5 minutes later, you know. And that's exactly how I am. Or you know, I can be walking down the street or going to a meeting, and everybody in there is a motherfucker, you know. And my will and my desire is what got me in trouble and set me up for failure the most important part of my life, and the important thing today is that I'm not in control. And that got me onto my 4th step. And when you're working your steps, I suggest that you develop a good relationship with your higher power before you move on into your 4th step. And the 4th step is we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Searching and fearless moral inventory. Well, what am I searching for? You know, what am I scared of? Well, if you're like me, I got high and drunk to escape reality. There was something in my house, or in my life, or in my house, or something that I didn't want to deal with, or that I couldn't look at, and I hated myself when I got here, and I held my head like this, and I couldn't even look in the mirror, you know. And I help addicts today that are just like that. Well, I was searching for the truth, and I was searching for closure, because I was very, very angry. It was my most comfortable emotion, and I was like a puffer fish, or I was like a nuclear reactor. You know, I would get mad and calm down, get mad and calm down, get mad and calm down, you know. And that stuff is exhausting, and I didn't know what a resentment was when I first got clean and sober, you know. And I know now today that anger and resentment is the most deadly thing in my life, even more than my addiction. And it's one of the 7 deadly sins, and what it does is it robs me from living to today, and I live in the past. Because at 34 years old, I was still pissed off because I couldn't play with kids in kindergarten. You know, I hated my dad because I never got to see him, and he never taught me how to throw a baseball. He was never at any of my boxing matches, my games. He wasn't there when I graduated high school. And you know, I hated that girlfriend that I sold those naked pictures of in prison because she had slept with some of my buddies. And working the 4th step is like Houdini telling you how he got out of the straitjacket. And it's just my experience, you know, people that don't work the 4th step just don't stay around. And it's the first one of the house cleaning steps. You know, I told you guys that my sponsor told me it was trust God, clean house, and help others. And so I got down, I got my list out, and I made all 4 of my lists, and it talked about abusing your sexual powers on there. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I ain't never raped anybody. I ain't never paid no girl for sex. I ain't never abused anybody. But you know what? I'm the type of alcoholic and addict that when I'm getting high and drunk, I don't even have sex. Flat out. I'm getting high and drunk. And if you're an alcoholic or an addict like me that gets high and you don't want to have sex, put some hearts in there, because that's a fact. And a lot of guys aren't willing to share that stuff or talk about it. But it's true, guys. The reason my sponsor told me that I was treat everybody like they're my brother and sister is because girls get and use drugs a different way than guys, and they have different feelings and emotions than guys have. And that right there was on my list, and I was the largest victim in the world. But I worked 4, 5, and 6 all at once, you know. And I found out what my part was in those resentments and those all that stuff that I was angry and pissed off about. And I learned that I was not a victim. You know, I was not a victim. You know, I am a survivor. And a lot of times in my life, I was a predator. You know, I sold drugs. I manipulated other people. I stole from them. And there's 2 parts to every story. You know, there's my side and their side. And, you know, it says we admitted to ourselves, to our higher power, to another person, the exact nature of our wrongs. And let's face it, God already knew what I did, and I already knew what I did. But the important part for me was to tell somebody else. Have you guys ever met an addict or an alcoholic and you ask them how they're doing, and they don't have any clothes, anywhere to live, and they ain't got anywhere to eat, and they won't look you in the eyes, and they tell you I'm doing fine? Well, that's the exact type of person that I was, you know. And I learned, you know, through working this step, I had a lot of trust issues. Let's face it, there's a lot of stuff that I've done that if I got caught for, I'd still be in prison today. And I learned that you don't tell things as a young kid, and you don't talk to anybody, and you suck it up, and if you get your ass whooped, you don't tell anybody. And this was the exact opposite of everything that I'd ever learned in my life. But once I sat down in front of my sponsor and I got all that stuff out of me, it's never twisted around up in here ever again. And it doesn't harm me anymore. You know, so if you guys are out there, I don't care what you've went through, what it is, what fear you have. You know, it says face everything and recover. And that was the hardest part of working those steps for me, was telling another person the exact nature of my wrongs. And he pulled my character defects right out of my 4-step, and right when I was working my 5th step, and he told me that what was my greatest character defect one day would become my greatest asset, and at the time I could not comprehend it. And he told me that if I messed up, to apply the opposite spiritual principle of my character defect. And what's the opposite spiritual principle of pride? It's humility. You know, what's the opposite spiritual principle of selfishness? You know, selflessness, service work. That's the opposite principle. And I found out through working those steps that my biggest character defect is that I had a king baby attitude. He's like, Michael, you got a king baby attitude. I was like, what the fuck are you talking about, baby attitude, motherfucker? I've been to prison. I can survive anywhere in the world. You know, I got this. I can make it on my own. And he said, that's right. Every time you don't get your way, you throw a fit. And I had to look at that. And I was very immature when I got here. You know, I couldn't get a cell phone in my name. I didn't know how to pay bills. I'd never been in a healthy relationship. I couldn't function in society. They tell you whenever you get clean and sober, however old you were when you started using drugs, that's how old you are when you got here. So I was 9 years old, guys, when I got here, you know, and you know, and I had some other character defects, and one of them was criminal addictive excitement. You know, I got a rush off of doing the wrong thing and doing the bad thing, thinking that I was getting by with something in life, you know, and I aspired and dreamed to be John Gotti. You know, it wasn't my choice to get clean and sober. I was sent here. And, you know, I was mad when I got caught. It wasn't my fault. I got snitched on, you know. And so if you guys are out there and you're going throughout your day and you're having something wrong, or one of your character defects pop up, apply the opposite spiritual principle. And one of the readings, it says honesty, open-minded, and willingness. You know, those are 3 of the spiritual principles. Acceptance is another one. I think there's 24 spiritual principles in the program. Those are 24 tools that you have that help you get rid of yourself, you know. And if you pull those out of your tool belt and you learn what they are when you're acting out, you can make it through without having to pick up, because I have, and I don't care what you're going through, those things work, guys, you know, because they have worked for me. And if I can do this thing, anybody can do it, you know. Nobody ever believed that I would get clean and sober. Even myself, I had given up. I was doomed when I got here. You know, I was doomed for death. And I believe now that I was doomed out on the streets to fail. That way I could lead other people into recovery, and I believe that's why I got saved. But anyway, and that's the only reason that I've lost 118 friends and I'm still sitting here today is to help other people, you know. And you know, when I get rid of my character defects is when they no longer reward me. Getting me to change is like pulling teeth, you know. I only change when I have to, flat out. I hear people that are on their 6th step. I worked this seminar called Drop the Rock. It was a Drop the Rock seminar. And if you're on your 6th step, check it out, and you're a 12-stepper. Go to one of those seminars on Drop the Rock. And the fellowship does publish a book on that. But I only change and stop acting out when my character defects no longer reward me. You know, I became honest when it was no longer rewarding to be a lying piece of shit, drug dealer, fucking dope fiend out on the streets that nobody wanted anything to do with. That's when I started getting honest and saying, hey, I need help. I can't do this thing on my own. You know what I mean? And that's only when I change. And, you know, I quit being a lying piece of shit then when I had to be, you know. And the 7th step is humbly ask God to remove me of my shortcomings. What is a shortcoming? The shortcoming is when I act out on one of those character defects, put myself in a bad situation, go back around my family that's used to me getting high and drunk, and they want to pin a medal on my chest for going to prison, and they all get high and drunk, and I make it through that situation without harming myself, anybody else, and I don't have to pick up getting high and drunk. I remember I couldn't take passes at the halfway house, and that's what they called them today. It's recovery house, and language is very important when we're fighting this pandemic that's going on across the United States. Like, people don't want halfway houses in their neighborhoods because they think it's people getting out of jail and prison, but they do want recovery houses, and recovery houses are for people that are trying to find themselves and had some struggles. So I refer to it today as a recovery house, But, hey Robert, love, stop frying the brain, bro. And, when I make it through one of those situations, it's not because I'm hip, slick, and cool. I found out, I thought my whole life I was a hustler. You know who I found out I was hustling? Myself. Something was looking out for me. I've been shot, I've been stabbed, I have pancreatitis, I have Barrett's esophagus, which is developing into throat cancer. I have esophagovarices. I fell out too many times to count. I have been in a coma and woke up when I was not supposed to woke up, and they was going to pull the plug on me on the 25th day, and I'm standing here right now, and there's nothing wrong with me as long as I do not put one in me, flat out. And something has been looking out for me. And the next part was made a list of all people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And remember guys, all we're doing is making a list here. You know what I mean? All we're doing is writing this stuff down. But it pissed me off because I'm one of them people, I don't like to say I'm sorry, and I don't like to apologize flat out. And I was a victim until I got through 4, 5, and 6, and I just started discovering that there were other parts and other sides to stories other than my own. But sitting there writing that list out with that paper and pen made me acknowledge all of my behavior, And for the first time in my life, I acknowledged all of the bad things that I'd done and my part in those, and I realized, that I stepped on and harmed in one way or another every person I'd ever met in my entire life. And if you haven't went as far down the scale as I have, you don't have to. I believe you can get this thing anywhere throughout your addiction. And right now these opioids are so strong, they're robbing addicts of their bottom like I had. And it's just important that we get everybody into recovery. And if you read the stories in the back of the book, there's a story about a person who quit early on, got into college, and lived their whole life without going through things like I went through. Please don't do the stuff that I did. Just get into recovery. You don't need any war stories to tell or any gelling things to do, guys. But I wrote that list down, and I made 3 lists. The I'll apologize list, maybe I'll apologize list, and I ain't fucking never apologizing, and I don't give a fuck. I hope they die list. I don't know if you guys are like me, but that's the type of amends list that I made. And my sponsor told me the best time to make an amends is when when your higher power puts that person in front of you and to handle up. And the 9th step was made direct amends, except when to do so would injure them or others. And my brother-in-law died, and he's gone, and I've had a lot of friends and cousins die. And it took me 19 years to make an amends to Sammy. Blake and Allie were attacked by somebody. I moved home, quit my job at the recovery house, adopted those kids. Blake got to live in my house for 4 years without any alcohol or drugs, had his own room, brand new shoes, Xboxes, everything like that in there. And the day he graduated high school, I drove him to Georgia and introduced him to his grandmother that he never got to meet because of the alcoholism and addiction issues in my family, and they lived in Georgia. And there was a lot of jobs that I had that I would come in high and drunk, and I wouldn't do my job, and I would miss work, and I would fuck those people over, and people I was in jail with, and people that I'm never going to see amends again. So I make a lot of indirect amends today. I remember working at graphic packaging, and there was this kid that would come in and puke every day, and he would miss his job, and he would take 15-minute breaks instead of 10, and the whole factory hated him. And I would help him, and I would laugh when I was helping him, and he got mad one day, and he's like, "Why the fuck are you helping me, Michael?" And I said, "I'm helping you because I was just like you, bro. It has nothing to do with you. And that's why I'm laughing. I'm laughing with you. I'm not laughing at you, buddy. You know, because I stepped on a lot of people's toes, and I never had a clear conscience in my life, ever. And I'll be working on this step for the rest of my entire life. But this step, ever since I've worked the 9th step, I can go anywhere in America today. I don't have to look over my back. I don't have to pack a gun. I'm not in fear of going to jail. I don't have any enemies anymore, and there's not a person on this earth that I would wish active addiction on today, flat out. You know, and changing this step cleared my conscience for the first time in my entire life, and I felt like I was okay. And I hope that you guys go all the way through the steps. And the 10th step was continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Remember when I was on my third step, I told you guys that my desire constantly changes, and that I can do my 3rd step prayer in the morning, and then I can be driving to work, and you can cut me off, and I can be ready to kill you. You know, I make a lot of mistakes, and I get caught up in the moment a lot, and I still get caught up today. And I have a support group, and I just bitch like crazy to them. And if you don't believe me, ask Higgy. He'll tell you. You know, because I dump a lot of shit onto Higgy because I trust him, and Savage and Denny Wilson, and people that I know that I can trust. And I've got an inner circle, and I'm not perfect by any means, and the program does not come natural to me to this day. But my sponsor started me working my 1st step the day that I asked him to be my sponsor. He told me, "Michael, I want you to go home tonight, and I want you to look over your day, and I want you to pray and thank God," he said, "your higher power, if you stay clean and sober today, and I want you to thank him." And you know what that did? And every morning when I wake up, I pray and I ask my higher power to be with me. And you know, I was one of those people that always asked God to do stuff for me. And when I started asking my higher power to do stuff with me, that's when my life started changing, and I started staying clean and sober, guys. And what the 10th step does for me is it keeps my days from running together. You know, you can do something to me on Monday, and I'll still be thinking about it all day, every day, and it'll be Friday, and you'll be living your life, and I'll be thinking about that shit. But I got a 10th step now, and every day, if I work that step, I wake up. And I've never lived the same 2 days of sobriety since the day I've gotten clean. Every day has been actually different. You know, and I wake up free every morning with a fresh, brand new start on life and a brand new day. And I'm not living the same day like Groundhog Day over and over and over and over again, and stuck on little stupid stuff that happens in my life instead of all of the good stuff that happens in my life. I'm one of those people that I can have 1,000 things right in my life, and I can have one thing going wrong, and I'll let that thing control and dictate my life and ruin it. You know? And that's why I have to have a program, and that's what the 10th step does for me. You know, I'm constantly taking spot check inventories of myself and trying to regroup and better myself and finding out my part in situations, you know, and you know, just processing what's going on with me, my addiction, and my life, guys. And the 11th step was sought through prayer and meditation to prove my conscious contact with God. Conscious contact with God, guys. You know, I told you when I got here I believed in God, but I didn't have a relationship with him, and I thought all Christians were weak, and people of faith were boring. And when my sponsor told me to pray, I cussed him out. And you know what I thought was the dumbest thing on earth, which was prayer? I believe today is the most powerful tool in my arsenal. It's the most powerful tool I have. flat out. There is power in prayer, and I think people were praying me in the rooms and into recovery long before it ever became my ideal to get here. And I know my mom prayed over me when I was a little kid and I was in that oxygen tent, when I was in that coma, and a lot of people have been praying for me and telling me I need to get clean and sober and I needed to change my life, and I didn't do it. And you know what I found out about prayer is all my higher power wanted from me was a relationship with me. And he'd always did his part, and he took me all the way to this point. He got me to where I'm sitting here right today, and it's important for me to do my part, and that's why they say faith without works is dead. You know, I just told you guys, when my prayers changed from, oh God, why me, or God, if you get me out of this one, to God, if you'll do this one with me today, my life started changing, you know. So I hope you guys, and my sponsor had me pray for people other than myself. I had to take myself off my prayer list because all I thought about was myself, you know, and I only prayed for me. And he gave me a prayer card, and I had to start praying for other people because that's how selfish and fucking inconsiderate of a person I was. And today I'm not perfect, but if you don't believe in God and you're an atheist or you're an agnostic, I do not judge anybody's programs. I do not challenge anybody's beliefs. You can work the 11th step without prayer. You can meditate. I tell people that they need to meditate or they're going to medicate. And what is meditation? You know, the way I meditate is I have ADD and anxiety, and you guys know I drive everywhere nonstop, and I go about 18 hours a day, and I have ants in my pants, and I cannot sit still. But the way I meditate, the first time I did it, it lasted about 2 seconds. My sponsor told me to sit on my bunk, close my eyes, turn my phone, TV, everything off, and sit there until my mind went silent. And when my mind went silent, just sat there until thoughts started coming back in. And he told me that once the craziness of my mind and my wheels quit turning and my mind went blank, the thoughts that come back into my mind are not my thoughts. They're not natural. Those are my higher power's thoughts. And I believe that. And the longer you meditate, the better you get at it, guys. And you know, that's all there is to it. And a person like me that has ADD without taking Ritalin, Adderall, drugs, Zoloft, anything like that, can calm down their mind. You guys can do it, but Rome was not built in a day. I've been working at this for 7 years, and I don't always meditate when I wake up in the morning. I usually wake up running late, put my shoes on, out the door, driving to Toledo, driving to FI Community Housing, driving to White Oak Run, you know, going to Marion, going to Kenton, going here. So sometimes I meditate when I walk Loki and Lily in the morning. Sometimes I meditate when I'm in the shower. Sometimes I meditate when I'm driving down the road. You know, I believe music is meditation. You know, that I don't know if that's what Higgy uses as meditation, but you know, music can change my mind instantly. And I'm a music nut, and I'm a music lover, and music is a form of meditation as well, guys. So if you're out there and you don't like prayer and you can't sit there and shut your mind off, put some music on that puts you in a good mood, that lifts your spirits, that makes you feel good about yourself, and it'll change your craving, or it'll change your thought about using and your active addiction. You know what I mean? And it'll get you outside of yourself long enough for that to pass, and you know, you can hold that out, because I'm one of those people that work my program a minute at a time, an hour at a time, and then a day at a time, man. And sometimes a day is just too long for me, and I have to get rid of myself, you know. And I meditate, you know, and I don't care what kind of program you work. If you practice the principles of that program, the program can work for you. The important thing is that you work one, guys. You know, that's an unrealistic expectation to think that you're going to stay clean and sober on your own without doing any work. And you know, there's promises on every step, but you know, through working all 11 of these steps, you know, I like the one that says I'm going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. You know, the first freedom that I ever experienced in the program was that the desire to use left me, and it's never came back on me. But I've never let up on my recovery. I've never let up on working the steps. You know, it took me 11 times in the program. It took me 18 months to work the steps the first time. There's no perfect way to work the steps. You know, there's no there's no wrong way to work the steps. The important thing is that you're putting the effort in. You know, I stayed clean and sober for almost 6 months before I ever worked a step or I ever had a sponsor, just because I was in a great environment that was conducive to recovery at that sober living house and recovery house that sat on the church grounds, and they kept me busy and kept me away from myself, doing community service, washing toilets and dishes and feeding people at the soup kitchen. But if I would have not got into recovery, I would have never been able to stay clean and sober, guys, and I truly believe that. And the 12th step is, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of working the steps, we practice these principles and try to carry the message to another. I don't have my book set in here. You know, my spiritual awakening, you know what it was, is I've never been to jail again. I've never been arrested again. I don't cheat on my girlfriend. I don't go couch surfing at my mom's house. I'm not that restless, irritable, discontent convict that spent most of their life in jail and prison. It's like a psyche change. My whole personality and the way I think and the way I live my life is totally different. My family's like, Michael, you've been brainwashed. And in a way, I have been brainwashed, you know. I'm on a soul-searching journey, and the 12 steps can work for you if you're an alcoholic or drug addict or not. You know, trying to practice these principles in all my affairs have kept me out of a lot of the trouble throughout this heroin epidemic. I'm not perfect, but I practice, you know, honesty, humility, open-mindedness, willingness, acceptance, vigilance, you know, trust, love. I believe love is energy flowing from one person to another, and, you know, I cannot stay clean by myself, and I never could stay clean by myself, and I never know where that power of love is going to come from throughout my day. So I'm supposed to love everybody and not play God, and anybody that comes into the rooms or goes through detox or reaches out for help, I'm not supposed to question it, and I'm supposed to help them no matter whoever they are. And I don't care what you've ever done to me in my life, what I've ever done to you. If we hated each other, if you call me and you need help, I will get you to treatment, flat out. And it's more important than the love that you have that comes from like for your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your family. It's unconditional love. You know, it may be the bum down on Kensington Avenue that has HIV, that is sleeping on the elevated train, that has no shoes, that ain't took a bath in 9 months. It could be the guy that's 30 years completely sober, you know. It could be the person that missed meetings and came back in and is ashamed to pick up the chip. You know, I never know where that energy is coming from throughout my day that fuels me to stay clean and sober, so I'm supposed to like and help everyone, flat out. And I'm tired of people fighting with each other, backstabbing, you know, all of this shit that goes on in social media and lying and clicking up and all that stuff. It doesn't matter. That ain't what the book says. And that ain't what the program teaches. You know, this is not a selfish program. It's so far away from being selfish that it's insane. It's a selfless program. It's designed to help you when you have problems and to help you get rid of yourself. And I spend every day, all day, trying to get rid of Michael, you know. And I started out dumping ashtrays and cleaning toilets and chairing meetings, and they wouldn't give me the key to the church until I had a year sober. And I've sat on the H and hospitals and institutions and went back into the jail and chaired meetings in my hometown and into the local prisons. I was able to adopt my niece, not my niece, but my nephew. I sat on an Atom board without any college education. I've managed 2 halfway houses. You know, when my friend's daughter died, I reached out and I started traveling the state of Ohio seeking for sober living houses, detox centers, and communities. And along the way, I accidentally documented the worst heroin epidemic in United States history, you know. And I live a life of service, and how I stay clean and sober and how I get rid of Michael is by helping other people, and that's why I only concentrate on helping people who can't help me back to keep my motives in check, because a lot of my old behaviors and my past history, you know, I try to stay humble. I don't want fans. I don't want to be a celebrity. I'm not trying to get rich off this thing. I don't think it makes sense to bankrupt somebody and take their retirement to put their kid in treatment when they're going to die, and that's blood money, you know. I work on finding solutions for anyone, anywhere, at any time. and I have nothing to fear. And if nobody told you guys today that they love you, I love each and every one of you guys. And here's my survivor's challenge for no more heroin. Debbie Perkins, Aaron Doherty, my best friend Higgy, who gave me my start on social media, has always been there for me. He's the person I'm more like than any other advocate. And my name's Michael Pack. I'm a person in long-term recovery, and if I can do this thing, anybody can. I love you guys. Good night.